Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Emily Pelly, and I am the publisher at Morning Dove Press. Morning Dove Press is a Christian publishing house that has just started here in Nova Scotia, and we get to work with authors from across Canada who want to share their stories with the world. And these are stories that are meant to encourage people on their faith journey. And so we are really excited to have Erne Babcock with us today. Erne has written this amazing novel called The Erne Warder. This novel is available currently on our online store and on Amazon and Indigo. And so we're really excited to have you here today, Erne. Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to these days.
Well, I'm a professional graphic designer. I've actually been working in that field for a long time now, but I've always really been a writer at heart, and that's what I like to do in my spare time.
So you've written for a long time. Has this been a long-term hobby, or?
Well, when it comes to the actual art of prose fiction, I could honestly say that's only been since 2011 or so.
Okay.
But I've been imagining characters and stories since I was a child. So it's been quite a while, actually. When I was a kid, my friends and I used to play make-believe quite often. And our play was, I think, a step up from most people's. It was almost like improv theater. We had a whole story going on, and we'd make it up as we go. And that's really what got me started in terms of dreaming my own stories and my own characters and that sort of thing. But the discipline of actually writing it down is more of a past decade emergence in my life, to be sure.
Excellent. Yeah, and I see when you see this book, you can see your work as a graphic designer, because Erne did all of this graphic design himself, all of the characters. Inside, you'll find maps of the world that he has created, all just very, very creative and very well done. And so, well, why don't you introduce us a little bit to this world, to Cortavia, and tell us a bit about the Erne Warder. How could you introduce people to this story?
Well, it is a fictional world that I created, a bit similar to, how C.S. Lewis created Narnia and that entire fictional world to stage his stories on. So Cortavia is just a country inside a European-like continent of Ascarian in which the story takes place. And the backdrop of the story was really inspired by real places, real historical events that sort of got the ball rolling in terms of a concept development on my end. In terms of a world, I don't know how deeply I could go into that. I mean, I built into the book so much world building that's just kind of backdrop, but I put a lot of thought into it. So it's akin to like a fantasy version of medieval Europe, except with all made up countries, made up history, that sort of thing. That's the world in which the Erne Warder is set.
Excellent. Yeah, and tell us the name, the Erne Warder. What is the meaning behind those words?
Well, I knew from the start that when I created the character, he was going to be a former knight. So I set about to creating what this order of knights would be, because he was going to be an elite knight from an order of knights. In real world history, there was different orders of knights. You've heard of like the Knights Templar or the Knights Hospitaller, things like that, different orders of knights. And I liked the motif of an eagle. It seemed cool. It seemed heroic. But I didn't want to call them the Eagle Knights because it sounded like a football team instead of knights.
Yeah.
So I did some research in terms of the names for species of eagles, and erne is actually a term for an eagle that lives in a seaside climate and mostly hunts fish. And it was actually when I discovered what an erne was that I decided to make the character like a knight that fights at sea, basically a medieval form of a marine, what we have in modern terms, a marine soldier who is on a ship but then fights on land type of thing. And warder, it comes from the archaic word to ward, which means to guard or protect. I didn't want to call him a warden because of the modern connotations of what a warden is, sort of somebody in our days, somebody who's in charge of a prison or something like that. So I came up with the word warder, or one who wards or one who guards or protects. So he's basically a guardian, a protector type of thing. That's how I arrived at the name, the Erne Warder. And I thought it sounded cool. Once I found the word Erne, I thought, oh, this is cool. I like this. This is
Yeah.
going to sound good. Not a lot of people can pronounce it well when they read it for the first time, but once they hear it, I think it sounds cool.
Oh, absolutely. It's very unique as well. So take us down this road a little bit of the plot development and the character development that you went through, because that is certainly something that is evident in your book, that the characters have amazing depth and the world that you've created is very detailed. You have thought through so many aspects. So kind of walk us through that. So if there's new writers listening or people aspiring to write fiction of this kind, like
Right.
some tips, like how did you approach this?
Well, I'm a bit of a when you talk about fiction writing, there seems to be two schools of thought of how you go about to write a body of fiction. You have what they call pantsters. Those are people who fly by the seat of their pants and make it up entirely as they go. And then you have the plotters, the people that plan everything in intimate detail. Some of the most well-sold authors today could be taken from both camps. I'm a bit of a hybrid, so I like to plan ahead, but I also, as I'm writing, fly a little bit by the seat of my pants because some of my best ideas, best characters, best scenes actually emerge in the telling of it.
Hmm.
But when I approach a writing project, and the way that I approached this project was, I didn't specifically use a popular method, but you could compare my methodology to what they call the snowflake method, which is to begin with a premise statement and then expand that to a paragraph and then build it around until you get the full picture. So when it came to the Erne Warder, it actually started one day when I was taking a break from my work, and I was checking out a medieval town in Romania, actually called Sighișoara. And when I looked at the architecture, the medieval architecture that's still there, the kind of like castle walls that surround the old town, it has a medieval tower, and it has a church perched up on a hill overlooking the town. Well, I started imagining, ooh, that must have been a cool place back in the medieval era. And then I just started asking what if questions because I started daydreaming about getting back to writing, and I started thinking about, well, what would a story be like if I told it from a medieval perspective in a medieval setting? And so it was that very um, uh, crude beginning that I started to cook the idea of the Erne Warder. I liked the fact that it was a church. I thought, well, what if it's a monastery? And what if the hero is a knight who was hiding out in the monastery? And then I thought, well, what will the main conflict of the story be? And that's where I sort of took um, inspiration from my own life and my own emotional journey. Um, and I have one daughter. I'm a father of one girl, and when I think about her and how much I love her, how much I'd be willing to turn over heaven and earth to rescue her from trouble she was in, I thought, okay, I'm going to take the biggest trope that exists in fantasy fiction, rescue the princess, and put my complete original spin on it, using my own emotion of how much I care about my daughter, how much I love my daughter, and what I know that she is like, to fuel the emotional narrative of the story. So
Hmm.
I combine that with my own emotional journey in my own life about some of the conflicts or challenges that I had, and respun it into a narrative where the emotional motivations were the same, but the scenarios were obviously different.
Right.
And so, yeah, I basically, it starts with, for me, it starts with daydreaming. It starts a lot with places or concepts and ideas, and then I build around it. And once I get the basic premise down, I like to daydream a little bit about what would be some of the main climatic scenes, the set pieces, the big dramatic moments that propel the plot forward. And I come up with maybe 4 or 5 of those.
Mm.
So those become waypoints in the story. So once you know how the story starts, and then some of the major developments, and then what the climax is going to be, it's just a matter of connecting the dots.
Right.
Now, for a lot of writers, that can be the most challenging thing of all. And for me, it certainly was for a long time until I kind of cracked the code. I found some good advice online about simplifying the middle of a story into asking questions. Well, what would you do if this happened? And then come up with a list of what you would actually try and do. And then
Mm.
translate into that what the character would do in terms of solving a problem, solving a mystery, that sort of thing.
Right.
And then with those plans that you would set out to plan, asking the question, what could go wrong? And adding a bunch of complications to that short-term goal, and reducing the story to simply short-term goals to reach a long-term conclusion of the story. So it just becomes a chain of events of, well, we need this little piece of information, we need this clue, we need to discover this thing in order to get that thing,
Mm.
and piecing them together. That, in a nutshell, I guess, is the methodology that I use. But an awful lot of it comes just through inspiration. In fact, the book that I set out to write wasn't the book that I finished with, and I definitely felt God's influence when I was writing the story, especially with specific parts that were very much about faith and devotion,
Yeah.
and the religious themes in the story, because they were centered around this struggle between what I would call a religious mindset or a
Mm.
religious spirit, and juxtaposed against that being true, pure-hearted faith and the pursuit of God, and kind of putting those at odds with each other,
Mm.
um, is one of the reasons why the plot changed in different places and these characters were introduced that I hadn't even thought of. And yeah, the rest wrote itself, really, it felt anyway.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think any writer or aspiring writer hearing you go through that process would benefit so much, because I know I appreciate trying to get inside the head of the author and be like, okay, so how did they approach this? How was it? And so to hear you kind of bring together your personal experience with inspiration, with these fun ideas of how to bring your faith through this story, it's really, it's very creative, and so it's really cool to kind of be brought along. So thank you for walking us through that.
I hope
It's
it made sense. I'm such a writer. I like to have time to think about what I'm going to say. That's why I like to write instead of talk.
But I'm making you talk. So
You're making me talk.
it's true, but like hearing someone just talk it out, it's such a treat. So, and you mentioned your faith, because that is certainly a powerful theme in this book. What I love it is that the knights, and I won't give away too much of the story, but the excitement that they have for this faith
Yeah,
is really juxtaposed to this oppressive religious, you called it a religious spirit, but like a religious ruling, a religious power that
yeah,
oppressed people. And
yeah,
yet here were these knights with this really beautiful faith that they wanted to share.
yeah. Well, and at the heart of the emotional heart of that thematic struggle is the main character Arghan's personal struggle, because he's a man who struggles with a lot of guilt from his past. And his search for God is directly connected with his need for forgiveness or his want for forgiveness.
Right.
And it very much, his character very much speaks to anybody in their life who has been misunderstood or actually has a really good heart and really good intentions, but has been gravely misunderstood by others and therefore mischaracterized by others. It was that part of my own life that informed the character of Arghan of Danniker. He really is sort of an adaptation of me in many ways. Some people have laughed at the cover and said, "Hey, he looks like you." Well, a much more physically fit version of me, maybe, but in his heart, very much so. Some of the best writing advice is, write what you know. Well, in order to do that authentically, I did create a central character that was a man who was around the same age as me, and much of his journey was inspired by my own, but amplified and exaggerated. And I've never been a fugitive for years and years and things like that, but I felt like one. I have felt like one. I have felt like someone wrongly accused. I have felt all these things. And so, back to your question about writing a story and how do you come up with your ideas and put them together? Well, all of your life experiences are completely adaptable to a fantastic setting if you understand the emotional dynamics and can imagine events that would spark the same emotions.
Right.
For me, it was just people who didn't understand me. For the character, it's events that happened in the war that he was in, and the dramatic, struggle that he went through.
Right.
So it's about, adapting an emotional journey into a fictional context for me in that regard. And when it comes to my faith, what else is there more worth fighting for, right? And that was a big part of the writing of the story, and where I just felt the Lord himself get involved with the writing of the story. I mean, to someone who's not familiar with or has grown up in a faith tradition, they may not notice this when they read the book, but there are many, many allusions to things that people of faith readily recognize, up to and including naming some minor characters, things that people who know history, know language, know what they represent. They're actually thematic representations of the emotional struggle in the book. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, that's so true. So maybe you've already answered this, but what is it that you would want a reader to take away from your book? Is there a takeaway message, a takeaway idea that you really hope readers get a hold of?
well, I think when you strip down the Erne Warder to its most basic form, if there's a message behind the book, it's that identity is important. Not only your identity, but who you believe God is. And that's central to the narrative. I mean, central to the narrative of the Erne Warder is them trying to find out who God really is.
Right.
And his name, which at the beginning of the book, they don't know his real name. And it's the pursuit of his, I get emotional when I talk about this because it's very deep in me. The name of Jesus, the fact that there's power in that name, it's not just a name, the identity of God and God's love for us. And in the book, he's called Yeshua, which is just his Hebrew name. So the takeaway is, what is God really like? What is his real personality? And who does he say that you are? What's your real identity? And, in the book, it's Arghan's journey. It's the conflict between who other people say he is, but who he really is, and who God says he is. And that's the big takeaway is what really matters is what God is really like and who he says you are, not what other people say you are.
So good. That is so true. Awesome. And I'm excited to say that you're working on book number 2, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So what can you give us any insights, any previews, sneak peeks? Come on.
Without giving away the story of the first one, I
Right.
can say, generally speaking, as any good narrative, the characters grew a lot, and they're not
Yes.
the same people at the end of the story that they were at the beginning of the story. But the second book is going to put all the gains that they've made to the ultimate test.
Mm,
The theme is going to be about doing the right thing, even when it comes at great personal cost. And it's going to deal with the backlash, the reprisal to all the things that they did, and sort of the upheaval that was birthed out of what the characters did and how they did it during the first story.
okay.
And also a lot of the world building that I did in the first story, where I talked about things that you never really, events that you never really hear about, except that they are just kind of happening in the background, are
Right.
going to come more into center stage. So much of the anecdotal, just kind of mentioned once or twice during the story, is actually going to factor into the second book. So you're going to learn more about the continent of Iskarion and some of the intrigues going on in the continent, and some of the intrigues in the country of Cortavia, and how the characters all deal with that.
Right.
Uh, Plus, there's going to be a quest for every character in the story, a major motivation that uh, they're trying to uh, they're trying to pursue, trying to attain. Um, that's that's as much as I want to divulge, I think, about what the next book will be about. But I promise it's going to be intriguing and exciting. And anybody who read the first book who really liked the characters and wanted to hear more from them, it'll especially give a little more attention to the supporting cast from the first story too.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, I know. I can't wait. So, if you haven't got your copy yet, be sure to grab it. The Erne Warder. One of the things that Aaron has done is he has shared the first two chapters of this book for free. So if you go to morningdovepress.ca and find the book, you will see a little button that says get the first two chapters for free. I encourage you to do that. Download it, have a little peek into this amazing story, and then you can pop over back to our website and buy your copy of the book. It's also available on amazon.ca and on indigo.ca. So thank you so much, Aaron, for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
And yeah, we have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us at Morning Dove Press.